Hello, this is Loopline, and in this video I'm going to cover how to use GSA Captcha Breaker as a server. And so basically you can run it as a server and have other computers connect to it. So right now I have it installed on this VPS. And so obviously I can use GSA Search Engine Ranker or Scrapebox or whatever program I want to connect to this on this computer, but I can also set this to run as a server and then have other computers connect to it. So like I have 9 other computers connecting to this VPS and using Captcha Breaker as a server, so I don't have to buy a license of Captcha Breaker for everyone. I'm not saying you should not support the Captcha Breaker product and the GSA product in general. They're great products, but it's a product that's built with this as an option. So if you want to use it to be efficient, then it's all good. And I have, GSA Search Engine Ranker on all those machines anyway, so I'm buying lots of licenses. So basically the way you do this is go to Options and you set to run as a web server. Now, a lot of people do this to emulate different things. So like I have Death by Captcha emulated on this machine, and you do have to pick something to emulate. And a lot of people do it on their same machine, and sometimes they'll use different things like all zeros here or whatever. But if you pick the IP of the server and don't bother connecting to this server, because I'm getting ready to change servers and this IP will no longer be running Captcha Breaker within the next 24 hours, so it won't matter. But for the moment, what I do is choose run as web server, and then I pick the IP of the server itself, make sure this is set to port 80, and then simulate the following captcha services. Pick whatever you want. On this server I have Death by Captcha. On a different server that I have running GSA Captcha Breaker, I think I have image typers, whatever you need to do for your particular program. And then what you're going to do is all the rest of this doesn't apply to this particular element. Click OK. Now, if everything works, that's great. If you get an error that says unable to bind to the web server interface, it tells you about all these sorts of things. The most common thing that you're going to run into, and this you'll run into if you've followed my blue box setup, if you're using my auto-approved list service, is that it's running, or Windows IIS web server can be running. So let me show you how to just make sure that's not running and shut that off. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to the Start menu and then Administrative Tools, which you can't really see here, but this will pop open, and you can go to Services. When you launch services, let me bring this in here where you can see it, make it just a little bit bigger. Down all the way at the bottom, you're going to find Windows World Wide Web Publishing Service, which is a Windows publishing service. It's also known as IIS. And this is basically the Windows web server. Now this is only applicable if you're running this on a server version, such as this is 2008, but 2003, 2012 versions of Windows would have the same thing running. If this is running on like a Windows 7, Windows 8, type machine, then that's not going to be applicable, and you're not likely to run into these things anyways unless you've installed some web server on there. But basically what we're going to do is right click on this and go to Properties, and I'm just going to stop it. But more than stopping it, since I don't need to use it, I'm just going to disable it so it doesn't start automatically. And now that it is disabled and stopped, if we close out of here and go to Options, run as web server and click OK, then everything should be fine. And what we're going to find is that it has modified our host file. And so let's just have a look at that. And I'm going to open it up. And you'll see that what it has done is it has added our IP address here of the server, which is this 162.inzin.69, and it adds it here, and it adds the Death by Captcha API calls. And so normally the way this works is normally when you say use Death by Captcha and you plug that into GSA SER or you plug it into Scrapebox or whatever, Scrapebox or SER will make a call to using these API keys, or addresses rather. They'll make a call to the Death by Captcha service, send the captcha, and then give back the response. What this does is it modifies your host file to point any of those calls to those particular APIs to reroute them to the server address here that you're using, to the IP address that you're using for Captcha Breaker. And then Captcha Breaker will then interpret those calls, because it's emulating Death by Captcha. It'll interpret those, get the captcha, and then solve it and send it back. So that's the way this host file works. Now, that has modified the host file on this machine. On any other machine that you want to use it, so let's say I have 3 other machines that I want to use this Captcha Breaker server with. Now I have to take and just copy this and paste it. You don't need these GSA Captcha Breaker lines, but you can copy them just for reference. They're good to have. So just copy this and then go to your host file on the other machines that you want to use this on and paste this in the host file and save it. Now, just for way of note for people who might not be real familiar with host files, let me pull it up for you here and tell you that you're going to run into a couple of permission. And I apologize if I sound a little stuffy. I've been ill lately, got pretty sick, and so I'm just trying to get over this. And so the path where you're going to be looking for your host file is on your computer. It's the C drive, Windows, System 32, drivers, etc. So it looks like that. So, and that is where you'll find this host file at. Now, if you just try to edit this by default, even if you're set with administrator privileges, it's not going to work as a general rule. I've found that the easiest way to do it is go to properties and go to security and then edit and then basically add yourself in. So on this machine, I'm using user loop line, so I'm just going to remove it here like it wasn't there. Normally you'd see something like this, so I would add in and type in loop line and check names and click OK. And then under with loop line highlighted here, I'm going to just click this full control, allow, and hit apply. And yes. And again, I don't care about that you guys see all this security stuff because I'm not going to be using this server. But once that's done, then it should look something like this, and click OK. And then when you want to modify the host file, you click on it or right click and choose Open with Notepad. And then if you go to Save, it'll allow you to save it. Otherwise, it's going to try to force you to rename it to something else, and it won't allow you to modify that host file. So that is how you can do it. And then I even just put a shortcut to my host file on my desktop, so as I move things around I can get back here real easily. But once you have it running as a server, choose your server IP, port 80, pick the service you want to emulate. Once that's all running and you have no issues there, then you need to grab this host file information and copy that and save that to the host file on each machine that you want to use Captcha Breaker for, and then it will send all the Captcha Breaker calls to that IP of that server that's running Captcha Breaker, and everything will be kicked back. So you can see if I enable the log here, you'll see all these captchas coming through and getting kicked back out to all the different servers that I have running. Now this is really easy if you're running it on a server or a dedicated server, VPS, or whatever in a data center. I've never had to make any modifications to firewalls or anything other than the standard stuff that Captcha Breaker installs when it installs. And I don't even know if it makes a firewall rule or not. I didn't even look. If you're running this on a home network and say you have multiple networks here, you may need to add firewall rules or routing rules in your router. You may need to allow incoming connections to go to your IP address that's running this, but you'll have to figure all that out. If you're running it on a server out there, it's really easy and it just works. And so another thing I want to say about this is I have like 9 machines for 2 licenses of Captcha Breaker, so I put 2 different servers out there with Captcha Breaker running, a primary and a secondary, and then I set up all the machines to hit the primary first, which is a dedicated server, and then I have a VPS that I use as a secondary, and I run other things on those servers as well. But because Captcha Breaker doesn't actually use that much processor power, nor does it use all that much memory. On my primary machine, it can get up to 600 megabytes of memory usage and that sort of thing. So after it runs for a while, so it, but it's still very low, all things considered. And the processor usage, as a general rule, it's less than 15%. Granted, it's a dedicated server, but about $150 dedicated server, so it's not super powerful, but it's really low, and a lot of times it's in the single digits for processor usage, even with 9 different machines hammering away, sending captchas in. And then I have a failsafe. I have 2 running because I have some retry set, and then in like SER and Scrapebox and that sort of thing, if the primary server goes offline or gets locked up or that sort of thing, it'll automatically, or the captchas just can't be solved, it's going to kick it over to the second server, which is a VPS that I have running. And I will say on my dedicated server that acts as the primary Captcha Breaker server for all 9 machines that are running, that are hitting that particular machine with captchas. It does tend to get locked up about once a week or so. I have to go in and just kill the process and then restart it, just because I assume that it's getting hammered on so hard at a point that it just gets locked up, because while this feature was built in there and it's a fantastic feature, I'm sure that it was probably not intended to be used as hard as I use it. So that's why I have a secondary server, and whenever it does go offline, it just fails over to the secondary server and it's no big deal, and then I restart the primary server. You could also probably just write yourself a little batch file and have it kill the process every so often, like every 12 hours, every 24 hours, and then just restart the process. And that would probably work fine too if you wanted to make it hands off, but it's really usually not a big deal. I'm in there anyways, so I just leave it. But anyways, that is how you set up Captcha Breaker to run as a server, and various information that you might need to know along the way, and experiences that I have had. One other thing I wanted to add is, in the case of running more than one Captcha Breaker server, if you want to be able to use the other Captcha Breaker servers as a backup failsafe for the servers that you're running Captcha Breaker on in the first place, you have to further modify the host file. And what I mean by that is, let's say I have, like I said, 9 servers, and server 1 and server 2 are running Captcha Breaker. On servers 3 through 9, I just modify the host file and add in the host information that server 1 and server 2 generate. So on servers 3 through 9, we're going to see where we add in, say this is what generated by server 1, and this is the host file that's generated by server 2. I just add them together, pretty easy, and stick them in here, and away we go. So this will be any calls to death by Captcha for server 1 will be sent over here, and any calls for Captcha typers will be sent to server 2. That part's pretty basic, but you have to do this on server 1 and server 2 as well. So let's say on server 1 here that I'm running Captcha Breaker on, I want any programs like Scrapebox and GSA SER that run on this machine to also be able to failsafe over to server 2, which is my Captcha Typer machine, Captcha Typer emulation machine that's running Captcha Breaker. I have to then go into the host file on this server 1 and paste in this information as well and save it, and then any programs that are running on server 1 here will first hit any calls that are running that go to Captcha typers will go to server 2, and anytime that it runs death by Captcha, it'll go to this particular instance. The thing you need to know is when you restart Captcha Breaker, so like if I close it and then turn around and restart that instance of Captcha Breaker, it will rewrite the host file every single time. So if you have a crash on the machine that you're running Captcha Breaker on, and you restart Captcha Breaker, when it reloads, if you look up here at the host file, and we go back and have a look, see it took out our Captcha Typer machine. So then every time you restart Captcha Breaker, you have to go back in and add it back in. Same thing would apply to server 2. And it doesn't matter if you put that inside of the Captcha Breaker tags here, you can stick it up here if you want. It doesn't matter. It's going to rewrite that. It looks for every possible emulation and it just rewrites them all, even if it's not emulating them. So you have to go in and add that back in on any server that you're running Captcha Breaker on. If you're running Captcha Breaker on more than one server and you want the servers you're running Captcha Breaker on to be able to access the other servers that you're running Captcha Breaker on. If you're only running Captcha Breaker on one machine, ignore this last step. It doesn't apply to you. Just copy and paste the host information to your other machines and all will be well. So hopefully that makes sense, and that is how you can use Captcha Breaker as a server to run multiple machines through one instance of Captcha Breaker.